This is my first time on parole after 27 years and 6 months, so still a bit overwhelmed by everything out here, all the new technology and things, and being able to have time to come down here and see you.
I'm Kharon Benson, and I'm here to talk to you about parole reform, how it's affected myself and my family, and how it needs to be talked about in the 2020 election. I'll talk with my father and Douglas Duncan, another person who has experience in navigating the parole system, as well as an incarceration reform expert, to get to the bottom of what needs to be done at all levels after people are released to be able to create a better system. My father, Kharon Benson, 49 years young, got arrested for second-degree murder in 1993 and sentenced in 1994 to 25 years to life. After being sentenced, he had no contact with his only son, me, and did not meet me until I turned 14 years old. Prior to meeting me, he has been trying to contact me before that, but my mother wouldn't allow it to happen. Eric has taken the steps to become a better member of society and has been a role model for me, even from behind bars. He has graduated numerous parenting programs and also obtained his bachelor's and master's degree while incarcerated. He was set to be released on parole in 2018, but his parole decision was reversed. He was awaiting an appeal decision at Woodburn Correctional Facility in upstate New York until he was released August 10th, 2020. So I'm doing a project on parole reform, and I just wanted to explore the issues that people go through while dealing with parole, going up to parole board, and what they deal with after being released from prison and being on parole.
I have a decent parole officer. She's very understanding, and she helps me with with networking. Also, I was able to seek employment since I've been home, since August the 10th. So I'm in Albany and you in Brooklyn, so hours away. So my parole, she's actually understanding when I do explain to her that I want to come down here to see you, because I have a curfew at the moment, currently. So she let me go past that curfew whenever I come to see you. So
if there's like one thing you would change yourself in the parole system, something that probably has been on your mind when you was going to parole, and you see other people impacted, because I know you have a lot of close ones and friends that was incarcerated as well, that's going through challenges as well coming home. So if there's one thing you could change in this parole system, what would it be and why?
Well, I think it'll be the parole interview itself. The parole interview is really flawed. I found out the hard way, me putting myself in that position and being incarcerated and going to jail and leaving you, while I was in prison. But coming down to the parole board, that was like the biggest fight of my life the last 3 years. I actually was granted parole 3 years ago. However, they took it back from me, because of family opposition and the judge and the DA. Like, there's no rhyme or reason with the parole board. So there would be a person like me that earned their GED all the way to their master's degree. And then there'll be another individual that has the same time as me that never educated himself, never did any programs, and he would actually get granted parole, his first parole board, and a person with the credentials and the qualifications that I had, they would actually hit at the parole board. They wouldn't let go home the first one. And psychologically, it will wear on you if you're not content within yourself, and you don't have yourself focused on the bigger picture at hand, So even though the board, hit me at the board, I still continue to do what I'm supposed to do, as a human being, as a person now. So, and a lot of dudes, a lot of brothers in there, they don't do that. When they get hit at that board, they tend to, react. And they tend to get themselves in trouble.
10,000 people can go home and do well, and we don't hear any of their stories, and then one person, does something, and suddenly they won't let anybody out. So often the people who sit on parole boards are former law enforcement, like former prosecutors, former police officers who, have a bias. They have a certain view that they bring to it. And often there's also racism that plays in, like the parole board has been predominantly law enforcement, predominantly white.
People often see parole as being basically free, but a huge number of burdens and requirements still hang over people on parole. Many report that parole still feels like incarceration, and about a third of people will violate the parole or probation supervision. And 45% of people who enter state prisons are there for prison or parole violations. Some are for new crimes, but many are for technical violations like violating curfew. Parole has another layer of challenges for parents. Some parolees are restricted from so much it makes it hard for them to even feel free, which leads to some of them violating the parole for minor things. I'm talking to Douglas Duncan about his experience.
And yes, we committed crimes against individuals, societies, communities, but we even committed crimes against our families. I've never been to, and I know you've heard me say this before, I've never saw a graduation. I took my son to first day of school when he was in kindergarten. 5 months later, I got arrested and I went to prison for 16 years. I never saw a kindergarten graduation. I never saw a middle school graduation, high school graduation. Those people who are up for parole, we don't get a personal interview with the parole commissioners. We don't get a personal conversation with them before you go to parole. But any witnesses get an opportunity to testify against you before you go to parole law. In my mind, I could be biased, but that seems to be unfair. Another important thing that most people won't know, that I didn't know about the parole, but when you go to the parole board, I know in Sing Sing you usually go on a Wednesday. You get your response 48 hours on a Friday. They don't give you your response until after you lock in for the night, because they don't want you to come out and hurt anybody. Surely, I see you shaking your head. Surely you can see the problem with doing that as well. You give me that response, and then you leave, you go do your paperwork and y'all change shifts. That is ample amount of time for an individual to harm themselves, which has happened in the past. And all these people that they just let out have no medical coverage. They don't even have a state ID. The first thing they try to figure out is where they sleeping at. Where am I really sleeping at? So all these things are things that need to be in place before you even go out the door. And you set them up for a disaster. Even with all my support, parole was hard for me. Giving people on parole the right to vote was a big, big move. There was so many people on parole right now, and now they have the right to vote.
So how does all this tie into election? A lot could be determined depending on who is elected. Biden has a history of being tough on crime and is partially responsible for the justice system we have now. His 1994 crime bill is heavily criticized for contributing to America's mass incarceration problem, especially for people of color, and he still stands by it. But under his presidential campaign, he seems to suggest more reform, like ending cash bail and private prisons and expanding support for those re-entering society. Trump takes an opposite stance and supports cash bail and private prisons, as well as the death penalty. His First Step Act provided some prison reform measures, but many view this as an outline to an otherwise bad record on criminal justice reform. Trump has often and publicly stated his support for harsh penalties, more law enforcement. With all that's been going on in the world, I'm still hopeful that the elections will go the way it's supposed to. And even then, whoever is put in that position in office, I'm just hoping that change can start as soon as possible. For Wire Media, I'm Kharon Benson.